Unbound was like my hero for gravel racing and the sport. And that day was, I said like, I wish we'd never met because it was a disaster.
Welcome to the Alt Route Cycling Podcast, dedicated to covering the exciting and challenging off-road and alternate events that is growing enormously in popularity. Join us as we delve into the alternate cycling calendar of gravel racing, mountain bike racing, ultra endurance, and other mixed cycling events. I'm your host, Nick Licandro, and this podcast is brought to you by Travello Coaching, a coaching service to help you train smarter and race faster, including for any of your alternate cycling events. I hope you enjoy this episode and keep joining us as we explore the roads less travelled. In today's episode, Trekky and I give you a step-by-step rundown on how to prepare for a gravel race. This is a great episode for gravel riders of all abilities, with some tips across training, equipment, and race day. Trekky also debriefs on the chaos at Unbound, how he's working through the mental challenges of a disappointing result, as well as how he's preparing for Tushar in the Crusher. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Alt Route Podcast. All right, Trekky, thanks for joining us for episode 4. You're not really a guest anymore because you've been on 3 out of now 4 episodes, but thanks for joining us to talk through how to prepare for a gravel race.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure. I'm actually kind of lonely here, so it's good to have someone to chat to about gravel racing. So it's like I said before, I've got no problems chatting about bike racing. It's comes pretty easy to me, and it's good to feel in an evening going over some stuff.
So where are you right now, mate?
I'm in Colorado Springs. Fortunate to have good friend Sean Lewis. I've stayed some days at his place with his family and his kids and stuff, which has been really great to catch up. And now I'm at one of his friends' places who's really kindly offered their place up while they're in a cabin in the woods in the mountains for the summer. Summer break here is like 2.5 months. So it's pretty common for people to head away for the whole summer. So I'm pretty fortunate. I've got a big place to myself here in the hills, and it backs right onto some of the best trails, and like the gravel roads from here are awesome. And it's at altitude obviously, and that's the aim of this big block of training I'm doing now.
I've always found from my couple of trips to America just how amazing and generous Americans are in terms of giving up their homes and or willingness to have people stay and really kind of give the shirt off the back mentality. So obviously something that you're getting to experience right now, and obviously it makes it so helpful when you're there as an athlete. So let's talk about Unbound, mate. Obviously it was a couple of weeks ago. You gave a kind of a brief rundown on your Instagram, but kind of talk us through what happened and I guess how you're feeling now and what your plans are moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it was a disaster. It was probably, how do you say, exaggerated, just because of the amount of effort I'd put into it. If it was just any old race in Oz, it'd be for sure devastating. But like the time I spent, the money I spent, it was really hard to take how it went, to be honest. Even on like all that. Trekky TV saw like this much of what I was doing, and then there was a lot more, and many other people too, the same. Basically it rained the day before the race, and like a big dump of a storm, like heaps of rain. And there was this, there's a lot of people probably know about it now, but there was this section at mile 11, so like I think it's only 30 minutes into the day, of mud. And the day before we weren't sure how bad it would be. Our guys were talking about driving out there and checking it out, and the roads I'd ridden were fine. Like it had rained and it was fine, not a problem, but there was like these low maintenance roads or whatever, like farm roads that really have issues when it rains. And anyway, we kind of rode it off a bit. But when we got there, my God, like I've never seen anything like it. The length of it, like it just went on and on and on. The mud is building up on your wheels, and it fills your drivetrain. Basically, it fills the whole back and front of your bike. And I think what happened for me was it somehow kind of filled the rear derailleur, and yeah, like it just got too full of mud, and I was trying to shift, and then the motor in the derailleur actually broke. It failed, which I don't blame it. I mean, conditions like that, it was just it was obviously unlucky. You had to have a set of skills and like knowledge about how to get through there, and maybe knowing it was coming, but you also had to have some luck and quite a bit of luck, and heaps of people didn't, including myself. So that happened like I say, 30 or 40 minutes into the race, and I kind of battled from there, and then it just got worse, and then I had like one gear to get to the first aid, which it didn't really work out so well for my body. I've had this back injury, which has actually been really good, and having to ride in that big gear and also carry my bike, which weighed 25 kilos or something for 6 or 7 kilometers. Like it was going really well, and then those things combined kind of just put an end to my day pretty early. I mean, it was funny, like the rest of the day I just went around and followed our other like giant global teammates, the girls and the guys, or guy Cole, and it just felt like I'd just pulled out and done nothing, but I'd still done 4.5 hours, like close to 5 hours, 140 or 50k of gravel. So it was funny, like to see people, like, and we went to the finish and picked up Cole and stuff, and it was just funny to see people finishing still that late in the day. I just felt like I'd done nothing, but I'd still I've still done 4.5 hours, which is probably a pretty normal race. But I mean, there's been a lot of talk about it, and personally, I think, they had a reroute plan for this section. I have no idea why they didn't use it. I wrote an article, and I said something like, you shouldn't meet your hero, and Unbound was like my hero for gravel racing and the sport, and that day was, I said like, I wish we'd never met, because it was a disaster. There were some really cool parts, like, I mean, the vibe in that little town is unreal. I think had the mud sector not been there, the route is amazing and like so well suited to me, I feel, and I was destroyed seeing that front group kind of roll around all day, and I just wanted to be there. So it was a disaster, but that's sport, I think, and I've had a lot of like good people tell me good things and like how to move on, and I'm getting there.
It's really tough, and there's obviously a lot of conflicting stuff out there about whether they should reroute it or it's all a part of gravel racing. My view is probably more on your side. I think the day's hard enough as it is without having to encounter something like that, especially when you're seeing people's bikes literally worn holes in them because of the mud's just worn away at the carbon and stuff like that. So I think it was a pretty interesting decision not to reroute, but I guess it's one of those things now. It's not something that you can really control. The race is done, and obviously you put an enormous amount of work in, so it's incredibly hard, but it's one of those things now. All you can do is look forward, which I think you've done a pretty good job at. So how are you feeling for Tusher and the Crusher in 3 weeks now that that's your next focus?
I'm feeling all right. I mean, I moved to altitude the day after Unbound. So I've been here like 10 days now, 2,000 meters, which is not anything too crazy, but I think it's a really good level because from here I can ride up to 3,000 or 4,000. Pikes Peak is like 4,000 meters. So I've been to 3,000 a few times already, and the first 5 or 7 days, like I was not feeling great at all. I tried to had the coach, like we just did just rides basically, nothing structured or trying to like push any power. And to be honest, like what I was seeing, it wasn't inspiring for me. Actually, on my gravel bike, the mud completely wrote off my power meter, which was brand new. So I had most of the week I didn't have a power meter on my gravel bike, which is something I haven't been like that for so long, without power. But it was actually really good because, if you're looking at the power meter and you first get to altitude, it's like pretty daunting because you're not doing too much. So it was refreshing actually to go out without a power meter. But I've got a new group set and bike and everything sort of sorted out, which is fortunate after, like you say, Unbound actually rode off my bike. The frame's done. The group set's done. Looking forward now. Like I feel the last 2 days I did some sort of like tempo efforts yesterday, which I actually got through. I tried some of these like talk efforts I've been doing on Monday, but I failed for only 4 minutes and I failed. Like I couldn't do it. So the last 2 days have actually been good and I've felt a bit better. So it definitely has an effect for me at the high altitude for sure.
How have you coped mentally? I mean, you're someone that knocks over your training, your efforts pretty well, and you're pretty tough mentally. And now you go to altitude and all of a sudden you can't get through a strength or a high torque session, which it's not like the highest of intensity, even though it's taxing on your legs, and struggle to get through that. So how have you coped with that mentally?
Yeah, actually that's a good point. Like typically, I get my sessions and I just do it, and maybe sometimes in the lower bracket of the watts or whatever. But I'm always like pretty good and usually over, like usually I'm at the higher end or over. If I'm feeling rubbish, it's a bit, but I always get it done and with pretty good success, I would say, and my coach probably would say the same. But actually, other than like being sick at home, this is like the first time I've sort of struggled with that, and it's been hard actually. And people are probably thinking like, well, you're in Colorado Springs riding racing your bike full time, climbing a river, but it's like it's actually been tough because I'm sacrificing a fair bit to be here, and then to have like without Unbound, I could have come. I mean, hindsight or whatever you want to say, but I could have come 6 or 8 weeks later. Like while I'm here having a good time, it's more about like ticking the boxes. So Unbound was a big cross, and then like if you're getting into the training here, that's the next kind of goal. Get altitude training, get going again, get going for the next one, because that's all I've got now. And I'm failing at that too. So it's like, man, it's been tough, I would say. But obviously it's awesome what I'm doing. And I've actually spent a lot of time with my good friend Sean and his family, which has been awesome. So that's like really good parts. And like I said, the last couple of days are going better. So I think I just need to relax, and like altitude takes a long time. I think like 3 weeks potentially to be feeling kind of normal again, which I mean, I'm only 10 days in, so I'm probably just a bit impatient too, but yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of people would like to be in your position, or, even if it's whether it's gravel or world tour. But the reality is as great as it is, you're getting to ride your bike for a living, there's certainly some really tough challenges now that you're facing as well, probably for the first time. So it's really interesting hear you talking through that. Your family was supposed to be with you after Unbound. Are they not with you currently?
No, so they're coming at the end of July. So I think it's about a 7 or 8 week stretch that I'm sort of going to be over here by myself. And yeah, I mean, once they come out, it'll be a different experience again. And actually, there's a fair bit of racing like from when they get here, and so yeah, looking at the calendar, it kind of it's pretty full. And yeah, once they get here, it'll be good. But yeah, I mean, like today was really good. I went out and just rode trails like right behind the house here, and it's like Captain Jack's is a famous like downhill, and yeah, that was actually really fun and kind of refreshing. But yeah, it's it is, like you say, it's the first time I've sort of faced this challenge because I pressure myself to be ticking boxes or making gains or getting results, you know, pretty instantly when I've committed to doing this. And I mean, the first stint was okay, but I mean, now it's just like, it's, yeah, a bit harder to see the value in, yeah, what I'm doing. But I just really need to take a step back and just be patient with how things are going. And yeah, I've actually filled some extra races in the next couple of weeks, which are all at altitude too, so I'm not losing out on that. And yeah, I think that'll be good just to like, yeah, get into that competitive zone again. I'm pretty much training by myself here, so yeah, it's good, but yeah, it's got its challenges, which I'm
challenging
finding
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good perspective to have. Like, I think, like, you arrived in America, you do your first race, you do incredibly well in a new scene and you're sky high, and then you do Unbound and it's almost flipped a bit. So it just, I guess, shows the ups and downs that you have to work through, and filling in a new race calendar, like another good result, and then you're probably, you know, back on your way up again. So yeah, it's certainly got its challenges. You know, there is good and bad times.
Yeah, I mean, say I had a good result at Unbound, which I really feel like I was in shape for something good there. It'd be a completely different story, like right now, to be honest. So it's just like, it's a pretty big mental game to like have that disappointment. And I've never put so much work into something before. I mean, I've put a lot into certain things like road nationals and stuff, but I'm not sacrificing the rest of my life to kind of do that so much. So yeah, that day was like, that was really hard to take. I just, in my mind, like when I think I was walking up one of the climbs before the feed next to Schlick, who had the same problem as me, last year's winner. And I was just like recounting the rides I'd done. You know, these are full days that I've done on the bike. And not only that, like the night before, I'm like, the week of, I'm thinking about these training rides 3 or 4 days in advance, trying to like prepare and be ready. And I'm doing 2 or 3 of these a week. And it's like pretty much a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. ride, like in terms of by the time you get ready and prepared and nutrition and, even like the amount of stuff I was consuming, like all for that one day. And then, I mean, a third into it, to be kind of laying on the ground at the feed zone was just like, oh, it was, yeah. So it's probably the biggest disappointment I've had in this sport for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, you always come across to me as a really unshakable character, and yeah, I can definitely pick up that it's definitely taken a hit on you. So yeah, I guess thanks for being vulnerable, because I think people listening will take something out of it, that it's not always going to go your way, and it is challenging mentally as well as physically, and then you've just got to find a way to pick yourself back up and move forward. And I guess luckily for you, you're in a fortunate situation that in 3 weeks' time you get another crack, and you probably can't really allow yourself to be down for too long, because you go into Tusher and the Crusher, and you know, it's another opportunity to score points, which I guess the overall goal is the lifetime series, not just Unbound. So
yeah, that is how it is. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, to go back into that mode of like, all right, now I'm all in training for this next race. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like I was just so all in. Like I just gone so all in for so long for that event. It's just like, yeah, to reset and be like, okay, write that off. And I'm not starting again because those miles are in my legs. It's all good. But it's just like mentally to just be like, okay, now you have to be all in for the next race. It's
hard to do that too when you know that if it happens again after you go another big 4 week block, it's like, what impact does that have on you? Yeah. So I completely get it.
And it's entirely possible. I mean, it's cycling, and it's not only cycling, it's off-road cycling, and that comes with its challenges and the potential for disasters that happen. And while I think I'm pretty well versed for dealing with that, having done it for so long, there's just an extra level of pressure for me at the moment, and this year particularly. So, yeah.
You mentioned before you just started doing your high torque efforts again. We know the work you did for Unbound, and we'd spoken about previously the kind of efforts and sessions you'd done for it. Now going into Tusher and the Crusher, I think it's like roughly a 4-hour race, 2 major climbs at altitude. Has your training, obviously now you've got to adapt to altitude, but how is your training changing for this event compared to a 10-hour relatively flat event?
Yeah, a lot, I think. Like that race has got like 2 quite long climbs. That's basically the story of the day. You just go up, descend, and then back up to the finish, or the hilltop finish. So, and that kind of happens in about 100 k's, a little bit more. So yeah, it's at altitude as well, which is probably the biggest factor for me. I don't think I've gone so well at altitude before. But in saying that, I've never had the opportunity to really do a proper block of preparation at altitude. So that's the biggest goal of what I'm doing now. And, now like I say, I haven't done any structured training, since I've been here, apart from just yesterday. And then, tomorrow it kicks off with like a bit of a 6-hour day with some, of these shorter, 5-minute talk efforts, a really low cadence, but still quite firm on pretty much by the end of them, it's full gas on the pedals, just like 50 RPM, which, is hard. And then, but that's something I've integrated in my training kind of no matter what the course is going to be, or the event. That's just like kind of a bit of a go-to each week. But now I'm like just trying to find these longer efforts, 30, 40, 50 minute kind of efforts on a climb at altitude, which is good for the following event as well, Leadville. So it's really good here because I can pretty much do the course for Tusher, the next event. So I can lay out that course and do 2 long climbs that are different. And that's the sort of stuff I'm trying to do now. The longest days I'll do will be 6 hours, I think. Nothing too much longer than that, especially at altitude. Like, you end up pretty fried the next day, I've found, for the longer days. And so that's probably the changes. I mean, back home before Unbound, I was doing those kind of 8, 9 hour, 10 hour kind of training days with intervals kind of at the start, the middle, and then some really hard ones at the end. Now it's like, it's a bit different. That climb at the early point in this race is going to be hard, and then obviously up to the finish is going to be hard as well. So it's a change.
It's great hearing kind of your training changing, I guess, specificity around the events. So we'll go straight into kind of our first, I guess, subtopic of how to prepare for a gravel race. And we're going to use the Dirty Warnie as an example because we've both done it before, and I'm sure a lot of people here in Australia will probably be eyeing it off as a challenge to do. So getting stuck into, I guess, training for a gravel race, specificity, obviously by the sounds of it, is something that you'd think is really important for your training, for your key event.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for most people, the Dirty Warnie is the biggest challenge is going to be the distance, I think, and the time on the bike, because it's harder than Unbound in terms of it's like the route for sure. So you're going to be out there a long time, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And that'll be the biggest challenge for most people, I feel. It's not normal, and no one has the time to ride for 7 or 8 hours, in training. So that's what I see as the biggest challenge. And even for me, like someone who rides a lot, and but previously to doing something like Unbound, I wouldn't do those really long days. Maybe 6 hours is as long as it gets. But so it's a big challenge, and it's hard to fit in. So that's what I would say is, like, if you can kind of for most people, I feel like if you can fit 3 or 4 of the kind of rides in the months prior to something like that, that you expect in length and time that the dirty warning will take, that's something that I'd probably look to do, even just for fueling. Test that out, and just comfort on the bike for that long is something that's pretty important too.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's looking at an event like that and trying to kind of estimate what your time will be. Like for someone like yourself, it's going to be 7 or 8 hours, but for other people, it could be 10 or 12 hours. And it's not realistic to go out on a weekend and do 12 hours every week for 3 months. And I don't think that's what anyone would suggest, but I think it is a good idea to build through time. It might be starting off, depending on what your longest ride has been to date, it might be 3 hours. Starting off at that point and increasing gradually, and you might get to a stage where you do 80% of the time, a month out, just so you get an idea of how you can handle that long in the saddle, what nutrition, etc. So I think it's not something you can just jump straight up to 10 hours, but working through over a period of time to get to that point, kind of like you did for Unbound. You didn't start at 10 hours.
Yeah, I think, and like that's, like you say, the comfort for that length of time, you need to build up to that and kind of condition your body. I think it's possible that like at the high end, I think you can start kind of change and you'd have to adapt a bit, but you can jump in and start doing some longer stuff because you've just got that condition, and depends how long you've been doing it for. It's okay, but you might do your first one and it's 8 or 9 hours and it completely destroys you, and you don't do, the next 2 weeks you don't do any intensity because you've wrecked, and that's a risk as well. So I think, it's important to not overdo it. And I think on race day, it's like a bit different, you'll be in a group. So that's probably another thing, like if you can get people who are also doing the same event, get some people together and do those rides together as a group and share the time in the front a bit and that sort of thing. Like in the race, you're going to be moving a lot quicker and the vibe will be a bit different. Unless if you're out there by yourself doing this training ride, like in the wind all day, there's a risk that it's going to destroy you, and it might destroy your shorter intervals that you had planned the next week and that sort of thing. So it pays to be careful.
Yeah, and I think Zone 2 is obviously going to be the foundation of an event like this. But I think it's important, doesn't matter whether you're trying to be up the front end or just trying to complete the day, that you're doing interval sessions and other structured training as well. I guess for me, I think strength training, which is something you've obviously incorporated it in recently, as well as some threshold or VO2 stuff, because there's climbs and going to be moments where you're going to be going into those zones as well. So doing all Zone 2 is not going to be beneficial. No,
for sure. Especially like in these events, you're probably going to get with a group, and chances are you want to stay with that group, and possibly they ride harder on the hills than you'd like, but if you can make it over the hills with them, then your chances of a better time in the race is much, much better. But you might have to push yourself harder than you'd like to. You might want to ride Zone 2 all day, but if you're getting over that hill means you can do a better time or get a better result, then you need to be ready to push yourself to that kind of VO2, or even threshold kind of arena in a race like that. So there will be times you need to push yourself for sure. I mean, me as well, and for Unbound and stuff, like I was fully prepared to be going full gas early in the race on the early climbs to try and make that first group, and then obviously later in the race to try and make a move or however it may have played out. But yeah, I was trying to be ready for that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think going into obviously training through different zones and having good structure also goes back to specificity as well, and making sure you've got a really good understanding of the course. I think that's really crucial for any gravel race, is that you go in, have a look at the course profile. Are there any major climbs or sections where there's going to be crosswinds or whatever? Because that's really going to dictate where you spend your time in your training as well.
Yeah, I think so. And for Dirty Warney, like the climbs, I think they started about 70k or 100k from memory. They're not small at all. So if you're going in and you're not expecting that, and you haven't kind of conserved or got to there, prepared to become full gas for an hour or so, you're going to be surprised, and you've probably done too much already. So yeah, I actually really try to study the course. I mean, for me, it's like the profile is what probably I look at most, to know where I'm going to be most under pressure. And then things like the wind maybe, or sections of rough trail, or like kind of unpredictable trail maybe. That's the sort of secondary things. But for me, it's like, how long is it? Watch the climbing, and then have a look at the profile and see. I feel like for me, it's look at the parts that I need to kind of hang on for, and then look for an opportunity later to make the race, if I'm going well. That's how I kind of look at it. But yeah, the profile stands out for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing too, is, and I've probably been called out on this in the past, is that I've done a lot of my training on my road bike for a gravel race. And we've spoken about it before, is that it's completely different. It's the resistance is a lot more on a gravel bike. So it's really important that you're probably doing a fair whack of those endurance rides specifically on your gravel bike as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, over here, I've got 2 mountain bikes and my gravel bike, or now 2 gravel bikes. But and it's fine, I actually like riding it on the road. I feel like I get more resistance on the road as well. So like doing intervals might sound funny, but like in the flat or whatever, it's like just that extra bit of resistance, and it means I'm like, while I'm here, I'm forced to ride it, and it means that I'm just on it all the time. So it's not like I ride a road bike all week and then jump on it for a race. It's like, it's just the bike I ride. So, and there will be differences in your setup. Like you can get it pretty much the same, but for sure, the geometry of your gravel bike is different to your road bike. So, I like to be on it all the time.
How different is your setup on your road bike compared to your gravel bike, or was it fairly like to like?
It's pretty similar, yeah. I like to run the same saddle bars, but the geo is different as well. So that's something that changes, and the pressure on your hands, and it's a different feeling for sure. So back home, I was just riding gravel bike on the road all the time, pretty much. The bunches and everything, just because, it was just, and also now I just do loops that involve a lot of gravel, which in the past, myself and a lot of people just didn't do, because it's just not what you did. But now it's like, it's something I do all the time.
The other question I was really interested to ask you is that, moving from, let's say you're a roadie and moving more to the gravel scene, which a lot of people are doing, there's obviously a technical element to this. So what's your best advice for upskilling technically on a gravel bike?
I think use bigger tires if it's a real weakness. The bigger tires just gives you more of everything, more comfort, more grip, more confidence. You can carry more speed without the risk. Yes, I think that's something that is really good, like, yeah, a key part. People, they want to use the smallest tire possible because it's faster. But if you've got a bigger tire and a bigger buffer, you've just got that extra confidence. And yeah, for sure, that's a game changer. I think if you really struggle on the downhills, that's something I'd look to doing. Even if you did it for training and you were practicing with bigger tires and getting faster and feeling the bike at a faster speed because you have that bigger tire, then you want to drop 5 mil or 2 mil for the race or whatever. But I think in terms of, yeah, if you were to practice on that and be able to travel the bike at more speed and more confidence, then that's a key, I reckon. Yeah, so I would say practice with components, particularly tires, that make it easier to go quicker and get used to the high speed. But yeah, also just practice itself. I think go ride some bits of single track on your gravel bike and you'll soon be found out how hard it is and how much different to a mountain bike it is. I mean, that BWR race I did was really a funny one. People here I think are used to it, but for me it was like, they talked about it like a road race. The guys that were doing, the guys and girls that were doing it that I spoke to, and I was like, oh, okay. And then when I went and pre-rode some of the course, I'm like, yeah, okay, there's 70-80% road, I think, or something, but there's also like 15 or 20k of single track, like rocky single track. I'm like, yeah, there's something to be said for just, maybe it's just a roadies course, but if you're losing 3 minutes in the single track section, like, that's invaluable. Like, you can't get that back on the road. So it was really funny, that race, actually. And I had 45 mil tires, which, I mean, I'm testing at the moment a 35 mil, which I was convinced on the 45, but I'm just trying some different options because the next race is so climby. But yeah, that race was funny. I had this massive tires and I was so much quicker than everyone in the not everyone, but like Russell Finsterwald and I was able to close to him in the single track in the later stages because I was dropped from running road shoes. I couldn't clip back in, but I was able to close to him on the descents, and he's a really good rider. And he had small tires, like almost a road tire on. And the rest of the guys were nowhere because one other guy, Jasper, he was pretty good. I think he does a bit of cross or beach racing or something. But he also had small tires. So it was just like, it was strange. I was just like, had this huge advantage in the single track and the rougher roads. Like, even at the start, there was this section they were talking up, the first unroad section, they call it, which is like, we did like 20 miles of road with some hard climbs, like all full sealed roads. And then there was like a dismount into the first dirt section over a, like a gate thing. And then maybe that section was, I don't know, 2 or 3k downhill, big fire road, like some ruts, but I mean, it was nothing. And at the end, the same thing, get off for a gate and out you go back onto the sealed road. Anyway, so they're talking it up. Like, I'm like starting to shit myself because they're saying like it's going to be so hectic into this gate, and then there's this section of off road. It's like, oh, it's crazy. Like, it's going to be just carnage. And I was like, oh wow, like, and this is my first, dipping of the toe into the scene here, and I don't know what's what, like, anyway, so into this, I had it, obviously on my computer ready to at the mile marker know where it was, and I'm like, all right, I'm getting to the front here. I don't care what's going on. I'm going full gas because I want to be at the front. And I sort of moved to the front quite easily, and I see the gate coming, and I'm in the lead, and I kind of dismount, get through the gate, get back on, and then it's sort of like pretty quiet behind me, and I'm steaming down this hill, but like, I don't know, just off the brakes, and we get to the gate at the other end, and there's like three or four guys, and there's daylight behind us, and I'm like, what's happened? Like, and then we had the full breakaway, and I had to stand on the back of it because I was like, I had no intention of getting getting in a breakaway, 20 miles into a 150 mile race or whatever it was, So, but it was like, just because that was purely in the tires, and I think, people are pretty much on road setups, and that was the advantage, and it was funny because I was not expecting to have that advantage. I knew the tires were a lot better, like bigger, but no one could, there's a few guys who could keep up.
I completely agree with probably putting yourself into some uncomfortable situations on your gravel bike. And I mean, don't go and hit, I don't know what the ratings are for mountain bike, but like a black diamond trail or whatever that has massive jumps or whatever, but doing some easy single trail at your own pace to get used to the bike, how it moves under you, because there are going to be some technical sections in a gravel race. And you're right, if you lose 30 seconds or a minute, it's pretty hard to roll back to a group on the gravel. So I think spending time on it, putting yourself in some uncomfortable situations and doing it at your own pace till you get better, and testing things like tires until you get more comfortable is definitely going to be more beneficial.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And typically any kind of single track, even if it's the easiest one around your area, on your gravel bike, it'll seem hard, I think. And, if it's not, then up the speed a bit, and it's going to be, you're going to become uncomfortable at a certain speed. And that's a really good way to kind of, test the waters and see what you're kind of capable of. And that will upskill you for, here in Oz, we don't really have single track in the gravel races, but it's just a good method of getting, like you say, uncomfortable. But there will be hard descents where someone will descend quicker than you. And that's something you need to kind of prepare for, and you don't want to lose time where you don't need to. And the downhills, it can be challenging because the bike doesn't. If you come from a mountain bike, it's like, oh, this thing is not my mountain bike. So it's a matter of getting comfortable on it.
Yeah, and I think probably doing a lot of training on your mountain bike probably doesn't really help maybe gravel as much, because you do have such a wider tyre, so you feel a lot more stable. So going and spending a whole truckload of time on your mountain bike is probably not going to help you that much either. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think people who sort of come from mountain bike, they have additional skill set already, which is valuable, I think. But it's not so much about the speed. It's more about understanding the impact of rocks on your equipment, and understanding what can go wrong, kind of thing. When you can feel, when the tire starts to give way and you're losing traction. So that's what I find. And even on the road, in the past when I've been under pressure on a descent, I can normally keep up, but my knowledge of where this feels sketchy and where I'm going to probably lay it over or not, I think that's built from mountain biking. Maybe I'm not I don't just get on there and drop like a sinker everywhere and smoke all the roadies. That's not how it is. For sure they've got the skills, but then I feel like you just have a better knowledge of what could go wrong, and that's why, touch wood, I've never really crashed on a road bike from going too quick. You just have a better understanding of grip and traction and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We spoke a bit about tyres, so it's probably a really good segue to talk about equipment. There's probably a lot to unpack here. The first one I want to go through is kind of bikes. It's an ever-changing market at the moment, while gravel kind of just improves and increases in its technology and expectations of what people want from a gravel bike. You're currently using a Revolt. I've got a TCX. It's a question that a lot of people ask me, but how much does bike choice come into it for gravel, do you think?
Probably a bit. Availability is probably a big thing at the moment. But something you're comfortable on, your road bike or your more kind of cross bikes may not, the geometry is going to be different. So, coming from a road bike, to the Revolt, it's the Revolt's pretty set up for these longer descents. Like it's a slacker angle, and it's just probably going to feel more comfortable going on the downs. Maybe unless you can stay on the stem and get a big negative, but maybe it'll feel a bit upright. For most people coming from a more aggressive road setup. But what I've done is just slam the stem and get a big negative old boy on there, and it's no dramas. It feels really good on the climbs. And I mean, to the TCX, I don't know, I had one a while ago, but I actually really, really enjoy the Revolt. And like I say, I ride it on the road, in the bunches. For me, the early days of sort of gravel bikes, or the more cross kind of bikes, I'd get on and just be like, this is like a bit, I don't know, like it doesn't feel like my road bike. But to be honest, the Revolt, I get on that and I'm just like, really comfortable, and not feeling comfortable like I'm upright, like punter spec. It's more like, this feels like a racy kind of off-road rig. And that's something that like I really like about my bike. And I'm not just saying that. It's I'm surprised myself how comfortable I am on that Revolt. Bike choice. It depends what kind of brands you're into. Obviously for me, it's the Giant range and the Revolt. I think they've got a really good package there, and I think it's really good value when you look at some of the other ones that are getting around at the top end. I think that the Revolt could be raced to the podium at any of these big gravel races, no problem. Then just a matter of how you spec it. And there's aero like gravel bikes now, which, I mean, they've all got their flaws. I've listened to a few things about like the Unbound mud and like aero bikes and those challenges. But that's kind of a how do you say, like pretty uncommon. Not, it's not really a consideration I think you should take, and hopefully people don't have to trade through that sort of stuff again. Finding something that you feel racy enough and kind of comfortable enough on the downs, I think is important.
I agree completely. I think the biggest consideration is having something that you're going to be comfortable on. It's all well and good getting an extra kilometre an hour because you've got a more aggressive race gravel frame, but if you're not comfortable on it, and it doesn't give you confidence in different terrains or downhill, then you're at a loss anyway. You talked about how it's spec'd. Let's talk gearing. A lot of people might run, 1052s and have a really wide range. Other people are running smaller ranges or 2x and 1x. Like, what's your opinion on gearings? Is it depending on the terrain and the race, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, to be honest, I think it's a changing space. And that is actually a question I get a lot. Particularly even with the Revolt, because I think, it depends on availability, but I think there's a Shimano and there's a SRAM. Obviously I'd say Shimano because I'm a Shimano guy, but the question usually is, should I get 1x or 2x? Like what, like that is actually a really common thing that I get asked about when my friends and that are kind of getting into a gravel bike, because they come out spec'd pretty differently. Like you can get a lot of 1x setups on OEM spec bikes and 2x as well. And it's a hard one. Like there's a few different applications, I think. Like for the top end, you need basically a road. Your biggest cogs need to be what you run on the road pretty much, to keep up and sprint and that sort of thing. But the trouble is you will hit some climbs where you need almost a mountain bike gearing. So that's the biggest problem that they are solving, I think. And I know like the SRAM guys run like a mountain bike rear end and like a pretty big front chainring, like maybe a 48 or something. But they've got the 50 tooth or whatever with the mountain bike derailleur. Which I think is a pretty versatile setup. But then, that's not, I don't think you get that OEM, like you have to kind of get the stuff yourself and make that up. That's something. So that's like kind of a bit of I can, you're not going to get that on your off the shelf bike. So for me, like the 2x is a pretty good option for racing. If you're not racing, I think the GRX or the 1x, it's probably, or even if you're not racing at the front or, at the top end, I should say. But 1x, the GRX, I think, is probably pretty good. You're going to probably spin out if you get with a really quick group, but you will have the range, and the simplicity of single front chainring, I think, is something I'm sort of coming around to a bit. And even kind of chatting with some people like the global guys we got here, which had a bit of tech and stuff, and about, and just last weekend, our little group was chatting about it. And, once it gets kind of muddy like that and you've got your front derailleur taking up space, also the action of shifting a front derailleur is like you're grinding the metal onto the chain, which, that's something that if you can do without doing 1,000 or 2,000, 3,000 times, if you do it, in one of those long races, then that's a saving. So the problem with it is there's so many options. It's a big question I get asked, and I'm not sure I have the perfect answer. I mean, for me, I think what I have on my bike is pretty much perfect. Other than, like I say, maybe the double chainring is a bit of a problem if the conditions get really, really ordinary. And then that's why, single chainring kind of is more attractive. But then I'd be without the range that I have now. So,
Yeah, so you're a Shimano man and I'm a SRAM man, and I get asked this question a lot as well. So I've got a 1x set up, but I'm pretty lucky in that I've got a TCX and a Revolt. So in some conditions, I will run the Explore group set, which is a 1044 with a 46 front. And then on my Revolt, I've got a 1050, so the mountain bike Eagle setup. If I was saying I had to pick one, I would probably go with that just because of the range that you get, and just probably ability to ride on any course. And if you're not racing, it's really nice to have that range for an endurance ride as well. Sometimes when I'm on the smaller, like the 1044 Explore, if you go out training, you really got to grind up some really steep hills, which doesn't make it that enjoyable. So it is a really interesting space. I think you're right. There's no one ideal setup at the moment. So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of progresses.
I think this year, the next year, we'll see gravel group sets go to another level, I think. Maybe with more focus purely on what you need for a gravel bike.
Yeah, agree. I want to move on to tyres. The first thing I want to do is tubes or tubeless?
Definitely tubeless, yeah. I think, unless it's a really smooth course, but that's not something we really come across in the gravel. Like, there will be smooth sectors for sure, but there will be that 1% that it gets super rough and you're going way too fast, and you'll pinch your tube. I almost guarantee it. And for repairing, like nowadays, the plugs, everyone's got plugs on hand. So if you hit a rim or a rock, it's pretty quick to just pull your plug out and plug your tubeless, and you may not even have to gas it up. For sure. And then, like, I'm using these Tuberlite inserts as well at the moment, trialing some of them. You can just run a bit of a lower pressure, something you can experiment with the tubeless. So there's way more you can do with tubeless for sure.
I couldn't agree more. It's an absolute no-brainer for me. I've got nothing further to add. I reckon tubeless is the only real solution for gravel. Interesting you're talking about tyre inserts there. Some people are running them, some aren't. Obviously, it allows you to run lower tyre pressure and gives you a bit of protection if you do have a puncture. Are they something you think that you'll run with moving forward?
I think it'll depend on the course. it's just the extra protection, and your tires are actually, if you have to run extra PSI, it may feel quicker in some spots for sure. It also gives you more protection against the rim, but it doesn't give you more protection against the rocks. It's like that old analogy of like a balloon that you've put so much air in, like if you just brush a pin across it, it'll explode straight away. So if your tire is like heavily pressured, sharp rocks, they're just kind of waiting to cut it because the tire's exposed, doesn't deform over those rocks. So when you have them at the correct pressure, which is somewhere between where you're not hitting the rim, which is saved by a tire insert as well. That's where that comes into play. But the tire is still keeping its shape, however, deforming over the rocks and not, like if you half blew up a balloon or to really exaggerate it, like if you just had like a balloon that's gone down, basically you can push the pin the whole way in and it doesn't explode. So that's the theory. And there is for sure like a point where it's the tire's operating as it's meant to, in terms of its like comfort and the way it tracks across the rocks. And you don't want it too low because it'll deform under your weight. But there is that sweet spot.
You touched on tire pressure. It's such a topical thing in the gravel world. It's people of different weights. There's different widths. There's different brands. What's your recommendation in terms of tire pressure for people that are going into a gravel race?
Yeah, like I was just saying, like I think there's that point where the tire starts to work properly, and it's not at 40 psi. I'll give you that tip. Unless you weigh a lot. But it depends on the width as well. Like this is like ongoing debate. I think if you're around that 40 mil mark, like that's like pretty safe in terms of like your tire weight, your tire rolling resistance. Anything less is probably on the riskier side. Anything more is probably going to be heavy. And but like I say, it can have a real advantage if the course gets rough. I'd have no qualms about using a 45 mil tire for sure, especially if you want a bit extra comfort. Like that is your go-to. If you have a 45 mil tire for me, like soft would be like 25 or less, 25 psi. Actually talking bar. A lot of people talking bar here, which is weird. So yeah, I think, like at Unbound, I had like 40 mil tires with inserts, the Pirellis, like the H, the fast one, with an insert from Tubalite, and I was using like 28 psi in the front and 30 in the rear. So, and I never felt like flat. I rode all the rough stuff that was in the first part of the course, and I was like out of the seat in the 11 tooth big chain ring, like bashing down the hills. I never felt like I was going to take a flat tire at all. And I was passing heaps of people with flat tires. I was like, if I get a flat tire now, like with what I've already been through, I'll be really ropeable. But I never felt like getting a flat tire. So I think that 40 mil mark is probably like pretty safe for all courses around, depending on your weight, probably between 25 and maybe 32 psi is where you're probably going to get the biggest benefit from the tire. Like any more, it's not going to work how it's meant to, and you're probably going to get cuts from rocks. Any less, you're probably going to hit the rim. So, yeah.
I agree. I think 40 is a really good sweet spot for a tire. I think biggest thing is you got to do the work yourself on tire pressures to see what you're comfortable with. I think that's the biggest thing, because you can't rely on what other people are using because they're different weights, different tires, different widths. A really good tool is the Silka tire pressure. I know there's a couple of other websites that have it as well, but you can plug in your weight of your bike, what grade the gravel is, like how smooth or rough, and it will actually give you a really good indication of what pressures you should run. You can use that as a really good starting point. and then altering to what you're comfortable for there, I think is probably my best advice for how to figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, something like that would be great. When I first started doing, I think it was like the Otway gravel race, I just took my gravel bike because I was on the next day after the mountain bike. And the morning of the race, I was like, I don't think I'd even ridden it really. And I just had absolutely no idea whether it was, like I'd heard things of like 40s at 40, so like 40 mil tire at 40 PSI as a thing in gravel. And I did that, I think, and maybe I was like, gee, this feels really hard. Like, I'm not going to have any traction, and this tire is like, you know, a big balloon just ready to be struck by a rock. And yeah, I had lucky we had like John Adams there, and he'd done a bit more on the gravel and the gravel tires. Yeah, and I found out it was probably around that 25 to 30 PSI mark. But yeah, like for sure, people are going to be coming off the road and going, you know, I run 100 PSI on my road tires. Like surely 50 is good in the gravel, and it's not even the case. Like, yeah, you really need to check that out and probably push the limits of the low point as well, I'd say. Yeah, go low where you may hit the rim. Obviously you don't want to damage your stuff, but yeah, lower is probably, you know, what people try and avoid. But yeah, there is that's probably the side I'd go to.
I think the biggest thing is also in people's head, they assume if I run a really low pressure, my rolling resistance is going to be really slow, or my bike's a lot slower, and it's really not the case at all. So people just need to get that out of their mind straight away, I think. So it's really interesting to hear kind of the pressures that you run, but at the end of the day, it's really important that people actually do the work themselves. So don't go into a race never trying it before, I think is the biggest probably advice we could give. Next, I want to talk about spare equipment that you carry. So can you run us through what you pack on your bike for a race?
Yeah, for sure. It's important because this is, and it's probably a new thing for people from the road or triathlon that are encountering. Like it's a bit more common on the mountain bike to kind of have to repair your own stuff out on the trails or the back roads in the isolated kind of areas, and that's something that in the gravel is really something that we have to do. And something like Unbound is like really you need to be prepared. But also like the Dirty Warning would be similar. You know, there's not someone every 10Ks. You know, there's points 50, probably 100Ks where you don't have any access to anyone that can help you. So you need to be able to support yourself. And a lot of the races actually have rules where you can't get outside assistance. So yeah, to carry on with me, I have like at Unbound, I took a pump, like a mini pump, because that's a fail safe. CO2s are good, and for most races I'd probably use that. Just carry like a 25 gram loaded with a head on it. The giant one I used is really good. And then that's probably a spare 25 as well. And not a pump. But then, plugs, like the plugs loaded into a cartridge ready to go, like a plug that you stab in, have a bit of that kind of plug there ready to go. And you just need to grab it from wherever it is. I tape some to my top tube. Some people tape into like the cables on the front or the panel bars, so that once you know you've got a flat, you can pretty much take it off where it is, have it in your hand, stop, find the hole, chuck it in, gas it up, and you're off again pretty quick. So plugs are really good, and don't just take one or two, like 3 or 4 is probably good. And then like 2 lightweight tubes. So like either the real thin ones that you can put a couple in a saddlebag. There's those packed down really small, and you know, it's a last resort anyway, so it doesn't need to be the world's toughest tube. You just need to kind of get it in and get rolling again. And I'd probably like gas it up a bit harder than, you know, you normally would, because with that tube in there, the risk of pinching it is high. And the worst thing is when you've flatted to flat again after you've just fixed it. Multi-tool, obviously, for any bits and pieces. I feel like chain stuff is bit of a thing in the past, I want to say, touch wood. I haven't had chain dramas in my life, I don't think, but it's good to be kind of prepared, I guess. Like it's hard because sometimes I'm like racing for the win or the podium or the front. So, I don't want to carry too much stuff and things like that. It's like, well, if that happens, it's a disastrous day and, it wasn't meant to be anyway. But if your goal is, if you've put a lot of work in, and like something like Unbound, I was prepared for everything, apart from what happened. But because that one is so long, you can take time back. And if your goal is just to complete an event, like the Dirty Warning for sure, like carry pretty much everything you need, like chain stuff, everything I just mentioned. And in terms of repairs, that's probably about it. I know some people take some like tape and stuff, which is probably a good idea, because you can fix a lot of things with tape. But yeah, they're the basics. Basically air, plugs, a tube, and a tool.
I agree with everything that you say. It's basically exactly what I carry. I think a spare small pump that fits in your saddlebags, which you can get, is a must, because if you run out of CO2 canisters, you're stuffed. I've got a few spare chain links just in case anything happens. I think the biggest thing for me too is like, where do you carry this stuff? I think having it easily accessible is really important. So I strap like a CO2 canister to my seat, so it's really easy to grab quickly, and also my equipment to quickly patch a hole as well. Is that something that you take into consideration?
Yeah, like I was saying with the plugs, like I have them on my top tube. I can just untake them as I'm going, and have it in my hand ready to go. It's no good having your plugs in the little, like, and the needle, whatever you want to call that piece, separate to the plugs, and like you have to load it each time, because by the time that's happened, the air has come out of the hole that you're trying to plug. So you need to have several of the needle parts loaded with a plug ready to just chuck in straight away and accessible, so you can kind of get it out before you stop and plug it straight in. The shorts I have, the Quare like cargo bib shorts, actually have pockets up high, a bit higher on the back, so don't interfere with your jersey pockets. I actually put my tool and my CO2 there, so I can access that as well, like on the go. But I think even if worst case, you just put it in your pocket, the CO2, or tape it to your seat post. But stuff that you can, because that stuff needs to happen quickly, otherwise you've lost your air, and you got to start from zero. So the plug and the CO2 is like something that you need on hand, I think.
I agree. And the only other thing I actually learned when I was in America is carrying a tire boot, they call it, which is just like an old like road tire, for example. It's just been cut up into like a small couple of centimeters, so that if you do get a big slash on your sidewall, is that you can put it in there, and often it means you don't have to put a tube in either. So there's some really handy things like that as well. But the biggest thing is you actually just need to practice with your stuff. There's no point never have used it before, get in a race, get a puncture, and you're trying to plug it. So if you've got an old tire at home that you can use to practice this stuff, it's probably pretty crucial as well.
Yeah, for sure. Or if you're like we were saying, testing tire pressures and stuff, you're probably going to have incidents where you may flat if you're going either way, too high, too low. And that's a good time to chuck a plug in and make sure you know how to do it.
It changed my mentality completely, actually, going on gravel rides and getting like slashes and stuff. And if I was on the road bike, I'd kind of almost crack the shits a little bit, but on the gravel, I use it as an opportunity to be like, great, like if this happens to me in a race, like I really need to know how to do this and do it quickly. So I think you have that mentality. It's quite helpful too. The other thing I want to speak about is pedals, mountain bike pedals versus road pedals. What's your thoughts?
It's a tough subject for me. I, for some reason, really favor a road pedal and shoe. Like to the point where the days before Unbound, I was even still wanting to use a road setup. But when I heard drops of rain or like forecast of rain, I was like, no, look, I'm just gonna have to. Actually, all the training I did back home, I did on mountain bike shoes and pedals, because I knew that was quite possible. I have to use them. And it's, unless you're like really good at setting up your stuff, if you change pedals the day before, it's probably not going to be great. You need to make sure your seat height's okay with that, and position and stuff. It's not ideal to be swapping too much. I actually don't have too many problems swapping between road and mountain bike. Like the day after Unbound, when I put road shoes and pedals as a setup back onto my gravel bike. I don't know. I just really like the feel of a road sole, and the interface of the SPDSL, the road pedal and cleat, a lot more than the mountain bike. That's just, I don't know. If I could use it, like if I don't have to get off in a gravel race, then I would use it. But what happened at that same BWR, the Belgian Waffle Ride in San Diego, I pretty much lost the race because I was wearing road shoes. There was 2 sections where we had to get off in this single track section with about 50k to go, which is where we went off the front. 3 of us left the whole race behind. It was going awesome. Had to get off because there was this like rock that we couldn't ride down. That was the first time I got off. It's not even the running in the shoes, it's the getting back on. They instantly fill with dirt or mud. Instantly. Like, it doesn't even have to be muddy, they just fill up. And the next kilometre, I'm riding on flat road soles, not clipped in, on single track, and lost, I don't know, a minute or 30 seconds or something. Finally got clipped back in. Like, you literally can't clip back in. You have to bang all the shit out, and finally got clipped back in. And then a couple of Ks later, we hit an uphill run. Same thing happened. And I then chased for the next 15k, I think, of road, and finally got back. But that was pretty much all right. Like, that was the biggies I had, and we hit the final climb with like 10k, 5k to go, and I had nothing left. So yeah, who knows what would happen, but that was a mistake for sure. So if there's any chance you're going to have to walk in your road shoes, do not wear them, because you won't be able to clip back in. It's just the way they're made. And also the cleat is plastic. It's not made to be ran on. Like you could easily snap the corner off a road cleat if you're running in rocks, something like, which should be considered, and I probably haven't enough. And the other thing is, you never know what you're going to get in gravel racing. So unless you're certain and you've done the route and you know the conditions, you know the weather and the mud and everything, it's pretty much going to be revert to mountain bike cleats and pedals.
I agree completely with everything that you just said. And I will say, if you're someone that doesn't have the intention of being up the front of the race, definitely just wear mountain bike shoes, basically. So I think that's a really good overview by you. The other point I wanted to touch on is nutrition. A lot of people use hydration vests or packs. I know you did as well at Unbound, but how do you approach whether you should be using that or not?
Yeah, I think it depends just how much you need to carry, and what you can get away with. Like, if I could get away with not wearing it, I definitely wouldn't wear it, even though we've seen the testing, it's apparently more aerodynamic. It's important to remember that video is done on one person, and your body and your shape and everything is different. Dylan Johnson's video I'm referring to, which a lot of people have seen, is really good. But and he even says that, that's his body shape, and so don't just wear one because it's maybe more aero. On you it may not be, but I don't like to wear it. I think it's restrictive. It's hot. You might look like a bit of an adventure guy, but I think the effect it has on me, I need to wear it quite tight because I don't like it moving around, so it's a bit restricting on my breathing, and obviously it's extra material in your body, so the cooling is not as good. But if you need to carry that extra water and you can't carry it on your bike, or maybe in a bidon in your pocket, but normally in these races your pockets are chock is full of food, it's kind of the only option. And it's worked out on how far between water stops, and will the race stop at the water stop. So that's what I work it out of. If you may not want to carry it, but you may have to.
I agree completely. And it goes back to what we mentioned about specificity. Do your research in terms of where the water stops are. Can you get through to that point with the bottles that you can carry on your bike? Do you think, if you're going to be racing it, do you think they'll stop there? So they're the considerations that you'd need to take when you consider taking it. Let's move on to the race side of it. I think we've done a pretty good job at covering equipment. We've talked about in terms of making sure that you do a really good detailed check of the course. But how do you approach a race yourself? And using Dirty Warning, how did you approach that for the first time in terms of how to tackle it?
Yeah, I need to sort of take myself back a bit. It's a few races ago now, but yeah, I think for me that was probably the longest in time race I'd done at that point, in terms of overall time on the bike. So that was something. Even then, I wasn't all over nutrition for that length of time. Like, I wasn't eating enough, no way, or drinking enough. Once you get down the rabbit hole of gravel racing, and especially endurance gravel racing, you learn how much you need to eat, and it's not pretty. It's a lot of food. Like, this is something that I've kind of learned a lot about. And the Dirty Warning, yeah, like I say, I wasn't prepared enough at all for that. Yeah, like, nutrition was a big one for me for these longer ones, and just knowing where you can access it. Like, you don't want to be left out of water and stuff. So yeah, when I look at the route, that's probably one of the things I like consider is like, where can I refill? Where can I get bottles? Is there a bottle drop? Like, I think for the Dirty Warning, they kindly took bottles to maybe, or like a musette I think I had with bottles and food, to maybe 3 points along the way, 3 or 4, I can't quite remember, but which is really handy because then you're getting your own nutrition. Although even then, at the last one, I think the last feed, we just caught Jensen, who'd been off the front from like really early on, and I think we were starting to get pretty gassed, and like, this was the last stop. Maybe there was 50 or 60k to go, and of course, like, we caught him maybe on the run into that, maybe 5k in, and we were like, yeah, like, we're gonna stop. I think he had maybe a guy there, or he really quickly swept his like bag off the table and just kept going and went straight away again. And I was like, whoa, like, wasn't expecting that. So that's surprising when people do that. Like, so then it's like, it's funny at Unbound as well. We were talking about the pit stops. We even rehearsed the pit stops and stuff the day before, because if you can be the quickest, if you can get everything you need and be the quickest through there, like, that's the goal. Because if you're out first, great, and you've got everything, you haven't skimped on anything, that's great. So yeah, making sure you're not going to be left without what you need on the route, I think, is pretty important. And like I say, that was the longest one I've done at that point, Dirty Warning, and that was something I really was keen to make sure I was across and had that food for. In terms of tactically throughout a race like that, for me, I think in my more experienced years now, it's like a matter of kind of weathering the storm of the early part of the race, like the first half, and getting into the later half, later in the race with the best legs possible, to start racing basically at the end. So I think getting caught up in earlier moves, or if you find yourself early on for a long period riding over what you think you can do, even at the end, like, I think that's a bad move. Even for me, like, if guys are going off the front, it's like, I know what I can do for 8 hours, and if that's too much, then it's important you identify that pretty early, because you're going to destroy your day.
That's a really good point, and I'm really glad that you said that, because I think most people would assume someone of your ability would be like, oh, he can just go after anything. But I think pacing strategy is crucial, and knowing what you're capable of. If you've got an early climb and it's way above your threshold, like, don't go with it. Like, there's no point burning yourself into a 250k day. So you're a lot smarter to ride within yourself, And I've found most often than not, if you do that, you're going to pick up so many more people and most likely ride your way back into the race, because people have, like as we saw with Dirty Warney, Jensen, Jack and Connor probably went too hard too early and it cost them the race. So you kind of panic thinking that you're out the back, but if you stay to your own capability, and this goes for people just trying to complete the race, not getting caught up with the people around you and riding to what you're capable of is super important.
Yeah, I think like I was saying before though, like if there's a section, like a short climb that you can clear with a group, it's probably worthwhile, like, you know, sticking with that group if they're not like well above you, because that's going to be beneficial. But if you're like, I feel like I say you'll know, but like in early days, I mean, I didn't know what I was capable of for certain amounts. Like, so it takes some time to work it out. For me, like I'm pretty sure I know, like now you feel like, gee, this is really hard. And if it goes on for a short amount of time, like 2 or 3 minutes, if it's drawing out to 5-10 minutes, like that's when it's like time to consider, consider your own body and, you know, what you're capable of and realizing how long you're going to be out there for. And anything you do in those first hours are really going to catch up to you later.
I agree completely. If you're 2 minutes into a 30-minute climb and it's way above what you're capable of, probably better to ride your own pace. But if you're really close to the top and there's a group with you, absolutely is it worth trying to go a little bit deeper, because it's going to be so much more beneficial. The other point you touched on in feed zones, I think one thing that gets overlooked a little bit is the nutrition that's at the feed zones as well. And I think it's something to be really careful of. If you're someone that's used science in sports, for instance, for your whole life, and you get to the feed station and they've got winners, being really careful about that nutrition and how it will sit with you as well. Do you have any advice in terms of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think people's stomachs are obviously different and can cope with different things. I think mine has been pretty good. Other than saying that, I haven't really had to adapt, like change formulas or like brands. I use GU, and I've, you know, in most of the races, I'm pretty sure I'm able to always get that. Actually, they keep referring to that BWR race. They had, it's really weird. You have this lead car that follows the front group and you just gives you water bottles all day, whatever you want, bars, anything. It's unusual, but it's really cool. And it was funny because the day before the race, I was like, oh, what's the go with nutrition? And no one could tell me, like no riders. I don't know if they were being coy or I was just trying to find out, and ended up just speaking to the race director, Michael Mark. He's a really good guy, like really helpful. And he was like, oh, don't worry, like you can give me your water in the morning. You just come to me and give me your water bottles. I'm like, but how am I going to find you? He's like, oh, don't worry, we stay with the front group. And then I was like, oh, sweet, that's awesome. Like I gave him like 6 bottles or something, or 8 even. And then I'm lining up, I'm like, wait. So if I don't make the front group, I've got nothing. Like I'll just have to find whatever's at the neutral zone, like, and stop and do it that way. So you know, I was almost up for that kind of thing of having to just, you know, fuel with whatever was there. But in saying that, it's from that lead car, they ended up just passing out some random stuff, and it was fine for me. I didn't have a problem. But yeah, it's like it's hard to train with. I mean, I guess you could train with a bunch of different products, but I think the best case is like train with your product and be as organized as you can on the day. Get your bottles to where they can get to if it's possible. If not, like, you know, I guess water and then more food is probably the option.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the other thing I wanted to mention with stopping through these feed zones, doesn't matter whether you're at the front of the race or just trying to get through it, is trying to limit your time at those stops. You don't want to stand there for 20 minutes because, your legs are going to seize up as well. So you want to limit your time as much as possible, no matter where you are in the race. I think that's a really important thing as well.
Yeah, and it's also important to make sure you leave with that group that you arrive with, because if you're dilly-dallying at the stop, Unbound's crazy because it's like the feed zone is a kilometre long and there's tents, there's literally people everywhere. It's hard to keep track of. But most of the smaller races, it's going to be pretty easy to see who's where. And you want to kind of stick with that group but while making sure you get what you need and not rushing off. Like, you can get in there and get flustered and take one bottle, and you meant to take 3. I think that's not good, but get what you need and get back on your bike and get moving. And a musette's a really good idea. Like, I find if I can take a musette that has everything I need in it, I can just disperse that onto my body and bike as I'm rolling off, and I know that bag has everything I need. I don't have to pick off a table. It's like there's 3 bottles in there, all the foods that I need for the next 4 hours, and that's going to go into my pockets. The bottles in the bike. Off you go.
Yeah, that's a great tip. The other thing I think is really important too is mapping during the race. So a lot of these races won't have signs every corner or volunteers and stuff like that. So getting the GPX before the race, making sure that it's downloaded onto your unit, I think is really important as well. And obviously you would have found with Unbound too is that there's not many volunteers. It's on your own, it's self-supported. So that's a really important thing to be prepared with as well.
Yeah, and even that one, we were like, everyone had a spare a spare unit with the map loaded, ready to go at the feed, but not everyone has that. These products are expensive, and but the thing with Unbound is it's actually pushing the battery life of your device, which I think is a concern. So that's a challenge, but make sure it's charged. Obviously, even at Unbound, there's people without charged bike batteries, that sort of thing happening. Our most recent guest, I think, is a culprit of that. All that stuff is there is a lot to do in the days before these big races. Like, it's not to be underestimated how much preparation is going into it. So you can forget things like that. So I don't know, probably, I don't have one, but I'm saying that a checklist is probably a good idea. Just to make sure, because like we were saying, the people invest a lot to be at these races, no matter where they are in the world. So if you're failing on the basic stuff that you can just kind of organize, charging batteries and having that route. And actually the route is good to have on your screen with the profile as well. I really like that.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point you make, and it's probably something that we just overlook and take for granted, but actually a couple of days before, making sure that you're charging your batteries or lights and anything that you need, checking batteries and shifters, for example. Writing out a list is a really good idea to make sure that not even the monetary expense of entering and getting to a race, but the time that you put in, being as well prepared as possible to avoid that is a really smart decision to make. I think we've covered everything, mate. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the people listening in will get a lot out of it. I guess let's summarize and say let's just pick Trekky's top 3 things that he would do leading into a gravel race and what they would be.
Number 1 would be training. I've always said and put that at the forefront for my preparation of any event. I think, there's equipment, skills, all that sort of stuff. But if you're not fit enough, then that's the biggest thing for me. So I like to, if it's definitely a target race, I like to be do the training and be well tapered. Don't come in overdone. So in terms of your training, you've trained hard, but you've rested well into the race. You've done the maximum for your body to get the most out of the day in terms of fitness and endurance. Would be number 1, and then. Yeah, probably equipment. Number 2, specifically tires. Make sure you've tested your pressures. You know what size tire you're going to run pretty well, and what pressure you have it at, and make that specific to the course. Don't just. You can change depending if there's a rough course, which you would have checked out on the notes and stuff, or written it or whatever, and the pre-writing. And then nutrition, I think, is important, but not only knowing what you need, knowing that you can actually consume it. It's all well and good to say you need to have 120 grams of carbs an hour, but if you haven't done that in training, when you try to do it in a race, you struggle. Like it's a rude amount of food that you need to intake. So yeah, for me, that was something that I did a lot of, was training my gut to consume that much food. Like I say, everyone knows nowadays what they need to consume, and they worked on that 100 grams of carbs or more per hour. But unless you've trained your body to do that, it'll be really uncomfortable when you start.
I agree completely. And I think all your 3 points are intertwined. Obviously, if you do all the training and you got your equipment right, but you don't fuel properly, you also haven't done yourself any favors as well. So I think they're 3 really great points, mate. Again, really appreciate your time. I can't wait to see how you bounce back at Tusher in the Crusher, and look forward to checking in after that to see how you went, mate. Enjoy the next training block, and thanks again for all the gravel advice.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm still learning myself. So, and the US is a good place to do that. I'm finding, there's things you pick up here, which, I wouldn't be probably thinking of back home. So yeah, hopefully that can be a bit of a segue back to the Aussie gravel ranks, and
I'm sure you will be, mate. Thanks again, and look forward to chatting to you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.